I think we're good right now. I'm going to say welcome, everyone. My name's Amy Hastings on behalf of the Legacy Giving Committee of the Diocese of Vermont. We welcome you to this webinar, Fulfilling Your Wishes, End of Life Planning. We are in webinar form, which means that you can see us, but we can't see you. And you are muted throughout, but we do encourage questions. So please use the chat box. I think probably most of you are over familiar now with Zoom, and the chat box is the place where we ask you to put your questions as Jim makes his presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available through our diocesan website and also through the website of the Episcopal Church Foundation. And we're grateful for the partnership that we have with ECF for this program. I'm going to be adding to the chat box the link for the Zoom meeting that follows, the webinar that follows, just in case you did not sign up for it and you'd very much like to participate. We're going to end about 10:50, and then you will need to log back in order to start the 11 o'clock webinar if you did register for that and if you want to participate. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce our Bishop, Shannon McVeigh Brown, who will introduce the program. Thank you.
Bishop Shannon, you're going to have to unmute.
Well, it's fun. You should think that I would know these things by now. I've done this twice a day, 8 and 8. Anyhow, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Direct us, O Lord, in all our doings with your most gracious favor, and further us with your continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally, by your mercy, obtain everlasting life, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Well, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, especially to welcome Jim Murphy of the Episcopal Church Foundation. During this extraordinary time of the pandemic of COVID-19, who hasn't thought of their mortality or thought about whether they would want to be placed on a ventilator or desire other extraordinary measures to be used while they're incapacitated? There is no more important responsibility we have to ourselves and our loved ones than to make certain our end-of-life plans are in order. So Jim will guide us in a presentation to help us prepare for the end of our journey in this life by ensuring that our wishes for our medical care and other end-of-life concerns are in place. So Jim, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Bishop. It's wonderful to be here. Amy, did you have any other intro, or shall we just dive right in? Okay.
We're ready to go.
Okay, great. Well, it's great to be here with you. Thank you, Bishop. And as the Bishop said, it's very true that more than ever before at this time of pandemic, people are reflecting on what is important to them and how they can ensure that their wishes are fulfilled when it comes to their end-of-life planning, whether it is for their own medical care, their time in a hospital and that aspect of it, but also what do your wishes entail when it comes to how you wish your life to be celebrated? What kind of legacy do you leave behind? And that is both in how you show that legacy through your funeral plans as well as potential other gifts. Now, we'll have a second webinar coming up momentarily about what gift is best for you. So that isn't really our main focus of this webinar. But please do know that everyone who is either seeing this now or seeing the recording, please know that you can take these ideas back to your congregation, back to your lay and clergy leaders and share them. Because these are often ways in which the members of your congregation can ensure that their wishes are fulfilled. Just a few seconds on the Episcopal Church Foundation. For those of you who don't know us, we are the foundation for the entire Episcopal Church, all of its dioceses, parishes, and related entities. We are an independent and lay-led foundation that focuses on the leadership of financial capabilities and building those up in the Episcopal Church throughout the country. Many of you are familiar with many of our different resources, including Vital Practices, the Vestry Resource Guide, as well as our various financial resources, most of which I oversee in the area of planned giving, endowment management, and our new donor advised fund. So I'm sorry some folks may see the notes section. I'm actually not seeing them, but we had a strange Murphy's Law type kerfuffle on our website. So sorry about that today. I'm not sure why it's happening. What we're going to be focusing on is this booklet here, Planning for the End of Life. It's a great resource which is downloadable for free. And we will be sharing the link to that resource, both to the folks who are on this webinar today, as well as on the actual recording web page where this recording will be maintained. So you can get these resources there as well. So as we're talking about fulfilling your wishes, it's not the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, as used to be said way back when. In this case, it's reflect, remember, respond, and record. These are the ways that you, as an individual, can stay in control of what your wishes are and ensure that those wishes are fulfilled. And that is a key part of ensuring all of this, is to make sure that you have taken the time to reflect personally on what has been most important to you on another note, another R letter word, which is responsibility. That you yourself have reflected on what has been most important to you in your lifetime, and what are the things for which you are responsible. This is a key factor because many people get influenced by other people in their life, their spouse, their family, or whatever, and they may be pushing you to make certain decisions and do certain things which are not exactly what you would like to do. And so this is where it's so crucially important for you to take the time to reflect on what has been most important to you in your lifetime, what institutions are institutions you wish to remember in your estate plans, as well as individuals, and how you wish people to remember you. And that's really the next step of remembering and taking action from those reflections and making note. So who is it that you'll be responsible for? What are the needs that you'll need to reflect upon? But also, and this is a key factor we'll keep coming back to in each of the different ways that I'll be talking about today, is who will it be that you choose to advocate for you? Who will it be that will take the actions when you are not able to communicate for yourself and communicate to doctors, to other family, to the people that might be handling your funeral or your estate for that matter, and advocating to ensure that your wishes will be fulfilled? Now, all of these factors are quite important, but one of the most important aspects after you have spent the time reflecting and thinking about who it is that you are responsible for, not only your children, but perhaps those individuals for which you are responsible as when you are taking care of an elderly parent. When you get to that point that you've taken the time to reflect, yes?
This is Kathleen. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify, are you intending at this moment to be sharing slides?
They are being shared as far as I can tell.
They cannot be seen.
Okay. Let me take us out of here. And I'm going to try this one more time.
Okay. There we go. Wonderful.
Oh my goodness. Well, I am very sorry about that. I thought we were confirmed that slides were up. So thankfully, we're not too deep in. Thank you for bringing that up. Let me get back on track now. Sorry about that technical difficulty once again. So when it comes to recording, it is vitally important that you make a record of all of the documents and take the time to use a tool like Planning for the End of Life to be able to reflect on all the different component parts from medical plans and directions to funerals to your estate planning. And don't forget that when it comes to recording this, you should seek out appropriate legal, tax, financial, appropriate professional advice for all of these aspects so that you can ensure that your wishes are going to be fulfilled, that you take the appropriate documentation for your state, whether it is for a health proxy or for that matter, working with an estate attorney to ensure that these things are in place. However, it is vital that you've taken that time to reflect and before you get to that point that you make note of all of these factors. And this is a tool which will very much help what you are seeking to do. But one other thing I will just mention is please do remember as you are reflecting on what you would want to do, also give note to the importance of speaking with professional advisors if you are overseeing someone with special needs. I can't get into that in this session today. That is too complex of an area, but in a nutshell, make sure that you've spoken to professional advisors when it comes to placing assets in the names of those individuals who are of special needs. It may be a good idea not to put certain assets in their name, but hold them in trust or in other methods. So that is another reason why it is so important to seek out professional advice, as well as to ensure that you're using appropriate state forms. And I'm praying that you now just saw the screen change. Is that correct? Yes, I'm going to assume yes, because I'm not hearing the problem.
It did change. You're good. You're
Excellent.
good,
okay, and again, sorry about that. We're having multiple problems. Perhaps we'll need to do an extra recording for Diocese of Vermont. Happy to do that. All right. So when it comes to the first step, which is making plans for a medical directive and health proxies, these are all factors where it is crucial that you seek out appropriate state forms and that you fill out appropriate state forms to ensure that someone who is appointed as the person making your decisions, if you are incapacitated, the so-called health proxy, that it is properly filled out and that you have the forms available to that health proxy and others. So let me just say a few things about this as we get started. And this is, again, all going back to that reflecting and response and remembering and keeping all of these records in place. Make sure that you give clear thought to whom your health proxy would be. Now, this is important because many, many times you have health proxy, an individual who has been appointed your health proxy who is not clear on all of what's important to you and how you wish to be cared for, whether or not you want extreme measures taken for your health care, or whether you would want very extensive medical care. It is important to review this with your health proxy and use the documentation such as Planning for the End of Life, which I'll show in a moment, which goes into much, much greater detail of a variety of circumstances where you may find yourself. And there's two parts to begin with this. First, as I was mentioning, to ensure that your health proxy is someone who will truly carry through your wishes and stand up to people in your family who may not have the same point of view. Many of us have many complex families. Many of us have people in our family who have very different views from us on healthcare. Most Episcopalians that I've talked to do not want extensive medical extremes being done for them to just simply keep them alive and keep them alive on machines. But many people in our family may protest and want that. And the fact of the matter is, when you're in these extreme types of situations, it can be very difficult to have those conversations, and there may be quite a lot of contention among family. However, it's important for your health proxy to be able to stand up, if you will, and explain what your wishes are. And beyond just that simple state form, it can be very useful to have extensive documents in place detailing the different aspects of the conditions you may find yourself in, whether that might be that you are totally unconscious, cannot communicate, have had a stroke, all of these different possible scenarios. The Planning for the End of Life Guide, which will be shared with everyone, is a very extensive guide that takes you through a number of different scenarios. And what this provides is guidance for the person who would be appointed your health proxy to give that person clearer direction on exactly what you would want. Certainly you can have that as a conversation, but honestly, when it comes to these dire situations, when people are in difficult medical situations, it is much easier to have things in writing so that they are clear, so that they can guide the health proxy and actually give the health proxy the ability to say, no, that is not what our mother wanted. She wanted X, Y, and Z in her wishes, and this is how she wanted to be cared for. Related to this is that it is very important, in our opinion, at ECF, to appoint an alternate and possibly a second alternate health proxy. This is important because you don't know when something drastic is going to happen, when you're going to end up in the hospital. And it may be necessary, if your main health proxy is not immediately accessible, to seek out that alternative person so that that person could ensure that your wishes are fulfilled. Again, share with both your health proxy and any alternates that you appoint all of this material that you will have in place, so that it is clear to the people who will be giving the medical care, and to give that person more support for the decisions that they would make, that they would have all of this documentation in clear language. What I wanted to also say here briefly was that, sadly, I had a personal situation. I was able to get my mother, before she passed away, to put in place a clear will, and I got her to put in place a very clear direction for her funeral. I was never able to get specific medical directives and health proxies in place, no matter what I tried to do. Now, it could have been a major problem. I come from a very large Irish Catholic family, and there are many different views on what care to give someone when they're in that condition, which my mother ended up being, where decisions had to be made for whether to extend her life or just let her die naturally. And at that time, even though I had other plans in place, we didn't have the health proxy. And in that time, according to Michigan law, if any of the 7 members of my family were to protest what care my mother would be given, that would have stopped her from just receiving the standard care, and she could have been given extreme care to extend her life, which was not what she wanted. So at this time of COVID-19, where so many risks can take place, and you could be in a situation suddenly that you were not expecting, it is more important than ever to have all of these medical directives and your appropriate health proxy documentation for your state to be in place. Now, just to show you what the document looks like than just a page of it. It's a very extensive document, and this is just one screenshot. I'm glad we're not taking more risks on our technology given what has already occurred today. But there are a list of many different conditions or situations you may be placed in. This is just the beginning of it. And it allows someone who is filling this out, again, for the benefit of the health proxy and for the benefit of explaining why people have made these decisions. All of this material can be shown, and this is not meant to be a legal document. This is meant to be a guiding document to the health proxy, to those people who do have that legal authority to make these decisions when you are in that situation. I want to make one last point with this before we move on to other aspects of planning for the end of your life and how you want to ensure your wishes are fulfilled. And that is normally your spouse is the person who would be the automatic health proxy. And I just want to raise this because it is a challenging issue and a difficult conversation that you may need to have with your spouse. It may be the best idea to not have your spouse be health proxy. It may be a perfect idea. It is up to you. It is something that's particular to your situation. But what I will say is it is sometimes quite challenging for a spouse to deal with the person they love most of all when they're in this dire condition. It's sometimes hard to make that hard decision to not give extreme care and extreme measures to maintain their life, even if that person had not wanted those extreme measures in place. And so I just bring that up because it's something, honestly, that not everyone will address and talk about, and they'll just assume that their spouse knows and will follow through on all of their wishes. But honestly, at that time when you're in those extreme situations, it is very hard on the spouse. So give that some thought. It may be just fine to have your spouse do that as long as your spouse will be able to fulfill the wishes that you are laying out. And again, a document like this may well help the person who is responsible for making those decisions at that time. There may be other questions that have come up, and I'll just invite everyone to type into the chat. If they do have any questions, I'm happy to take them and pause at any time. To continue for now, though, into other aspects of your planning, and many of the same issues will come up, quite honestly, at a funeral or memorial service. Most of the time, you don't need to have a legal document in place for choosing your advocate, choosing the person who will demonstrate to people what your wishes are. But I would still recommend that you seek to pick someone. That person may well be your priest at your congregation. And I would encourage, once again, to use this document planning for the end of life, fill it out so that you have clarity on a variety of things, from the type of service that you'd want to the readings to the music. Some people want a very particular service. Some people don't care. But if this is something that you wish to do to leave behind a legacy for the members of your family, this is a true opportunity to show your faith in the resurrection, to show your commitment to the church, as well as great opportunities for you to leave behind memorials. And something which you can also consider as you're filling out the various aspects of your funeral, there's nothing that stops you from making a video recording to be played for your family, to allow you to say goodbye in that way. It may sound a little morbid, but quite honestly, what all of this comes back to is enabling you to make the decisions that you want to do and to ensure that those are fulfilled. Having someone who knows what your wishes are and that you have put those wishes in writing will help this to be fulfilled that much more easily. In addition, It is easier to avoid conflict when you have an advocate and when you have things written down and making things very clear. As I often joke when I have done various workshops, you can avoid having conflict between your Wiccan daughter and your evangelical son on deciding exactly what type of funeral mom would really want by making sure that mom has put in place exactly what she wants in her funeral in writing and has appointed someone to speak for her in that case. You're also taking the burden away from people, and this is an ongoing aspect. It goes for your estate plans as well. You're taking away that burden that is placed on people to make these decisions when you're no longer there, when you're not able to indicate the type of funeral that you want, or for that matter, if you had made the decision about organ donation. Time and again, this can be a great conflict in the family. And if it isn't exactly clear that you had chosen either to give or not to give organs, it makes it easier and clearer to your family and will ensure that your wishes are fulfilled. Now, there are basic documents which you can find in the Planning for the End of Life Guide. And what I will recommend, and this is absolutely true for most everyone who will be on this call, that your priest in charge, your rector or vicar would love, absolutely love to have this information in your file. Your rector does not want to conflict with your family either, and it'll be easier on her or whomever you have if she can simply pull out this document and say, no, this is the way that the funeral was planned, and these are the wishes that we're going to contend with. A side note, just to think about and to consider and to keep in mind, where are your grave or columbarium documents? If you have stored those documents in your safe deposit box, they may not be able to be retrievable until after your will is probated. So most of the time, it's recommended that you keep copies of your gravesite or columbarium documents, all of these pre-planning types of documents which you might have put in place, to make sure that there are copies of them available, and quite honestly, that your advocate, the person who'd be advocating for your wishes at your funeral, would have copies of those. If they're locked away in that safe deposit box, it will be very difficult to get to them, and it just will complicate, once again, a situation which is already so emotional and so problematic. A final note before I show you a quick screenshot of one of the documents in the Planning for the End of Life Guide is your obituary. Again, to some people, this may seem a bit morbid, but honestly, for many, many people, they want to be able to give that last testimony, that last summary of their life and their accomplishments and what they want people to hear about them and what they did in their life and what was important to them. This is a burden, honestly, on the family to write that obituary, especially when it's a sudden thing, especially after a dramatic sudden illness, which could happen at this time of COVID-19. Thinking through what has been important in your life, reflecting on it, recording that, and thinking through the different things that you want people to know in your obituary is actually not that morbid. It's enabling you to ensure that you can make this last communication that would be out there. Some people may also not want to have an obituary, and that also then can relieve a burden. But for most people, it is relieving a burden on the family and those who are left behind at a very difficult time to have to pull that together. And as a side note, and speaking from experience with different family members who have passed away, sometimes details among families are lost. and certain details about someone who may be a very elderly member of the family may not be known. If there is a great aunt who doesn't have children, a great uncle who, you know, perhaps various things had kept him away from the family for many years, but he wants to be remembered in a certain way. It is much better for that person to have all of the details in their obituary so that they can ensure that all of the information that they would want in there and make sure it's correct can be published. Much like the other documents which are in the Planning for the End of Life Guide, again, this is free, you can download it at any time. There are much more extensive funeral instructions and burial instructions and other issues to help you think through this. These are things which also a funeral director would talk someone through if they do a pre-plan, but why not consider this your opportunity to ensure that your wishes are fulfilled and the communication is done the way you wish it to be made. Okay, I haven't heard any questions come up, so Amy, you're certainly welcome to interrupt me.
Jim,
Yes.
this is Amy.
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure everybody knows in the chat box, you can find a link to the booklet that Jim is referring to. And I highly, highly recommend that either now or later, preferably later, of course, you do take a
You can
chance
pull it up now.
to look at that. So.
Thank you, Amy. And of course, if folks have questions, I am personally not, just to be clear, I'm not giving legal tax or financial advice in this webinar. I am raising awareness of a variety of things which you should consider, and quite honestly, many, many people have not considered. And so many people do talk about planning your estate, right? It comes up all the time. But there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, I don't have an estate. I, don't have any money. I don't have any assets. Well, that really isn't true. Everyone will have an estate. Everyone will leave behind various assets, and they will need to also make various decisions when it comes to planning how those assets are distributed, but also, and people who have children or elderly parents for whom they are responsible, this is an aspect that you should be thinking about now and thinking through what is right for you, your family, and your context. Because through your will, you can appoint who the guardian of your children would be, as well as many times, depending on state law, who will care for your elderly parents if you are directly responsible for them. And so all of these aspects are also things you should be considering, recording after significant reflection. The top thing I need to just draw to everyone's attention, please do seek appropriate professional, legal, financial, and tax advice. It is worth the amount of money you'll pay because what you're seeking to do is to put in place documentation at a legal level, which will ensure that your wishes are fulfilled and that you can ensure that these things will take place and be followed. Now, when it comes to planning your estate, you do certainly have to appoint someone to be an executor. And in most cases, if you are working with a good attorney, they're also going to recommend that you come up with alternates. This is very, very important to first of all consider who it is that would be your executor, who would, once again, stand up to family, who'd have the capacity and the time to deal with settling your estate and taking it through the various parts of the process. But make sure that you're appointing alternates to that person. Something drastic might happen to them that was unexpected, and they may not be able to serve as your executor. Therefore, an alternate would step in. Sometimes an executor will change their mind or other circumstances come up and you need to move to that alternate. So be cautious and careful in selecting your executor as well as your alternate. And honestly, I would recommend also considering 2 alternates, because by having that backup in place, and then, of course, share with all of your executors, all of your alternates, these documents which you'll be filling out in the Planning for the End of Life Guide, plus all of your other legal documents, including anything related to a grave site or columbarium. Okay. So I'm not going to get into great detail here about reviewing assets, insurance policies. I'll talk about those in just a moment, but this is the time to use a tool like Planning for the End of Life and to work with professionals to ensure you're considering all of your different assets, because sometimes people will neglect to think about assets that might be coming in the future, other issues with each type of asset and how you wish to dispose of that or pass that on to a particular person. Different asset types may require different care. Letting your family know your wishes. You're hearing a lot of the same things that I'm saying over and over again. This is because it is amazing how many people, even when they take the initiative to create their estate plans and put their wills in place, that they do not let the rest of their family know what their wishes are. It is crucial for you to be sharing the basics of what you are desiring to do with the rest of your family so that there are not surprises. You don't want to have conflict. You don't want to have surprises. You want your family to be unburdened, because quite honestly, if you don't take the time to think through this carefully and use appropriate legal, tax, and financial help, you could end up in a situation where you may have challenges to your will. And you certainly don't want that, or your other estate plan. You want to ensure that the wishes that you have put in place will be fulfilled. And so make sure people know in advance if you're making, let's say, a significant gift to charity or leaving assets to one or more people outside of your children. Planned gifts, we'll talk about more in our next webinar, but whenever you're making a planned gift and giving a gift to charity through your estates, you're raising that charity to the level of family in your estate plans. And that is also why it is so important to ensure that your plans are clear and well known. Believe it or not, some people will set it and forget it. Do not do that with your estate plans. From time to time, review the estate plans that you have put in place and make sure that you have updated if someone has passed away. Make sure that you have contingency plans in place if someone were to pass away after you have written your will or put them in as a beneficiary of a trust or something else. So when you move from state to state, ensure that your current estate plans will be valid in that state. Sometimes when you move to a state, you have to write a will that complies with their state laws. So by reviewing your estate plans from time to time, that is another way to ensure that your wishes are going to be fulfilled, as well as giving you an opportunity to update because circumstances change. Children get older and don't need the same care as what they needed when they were little. Some people may need assets that they didn't need 10 years ago. So review your assets, review your estate plans from time to time. I certainly don't have time to get into the future of the estate tax. I will just say that your guess may be as good as mine. The thresholds for federal estate tax keep going higher and higher to really the 0.1%, not the 1%, but the 0.1% who are really impacted by federal estate taxes, and fewer states actually have them. So work with a professional to ensure that you can make sure your wishes are fulfilled. Just a few notes on here, because we will be getting into some of these aspects again in the next webinar. Wills or living trusts and probated estates. Again, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just drawing your attention to think through these issues, because some of the assets which you have, some of which are listed on the screen, will not need to pass into your probated estate, meaning the parts of your asset that would be accounted for in your last will and testament. Your last will and testament is what will be a public document and what many people can review and see. If you are in places like California or other states, I know it's mostly the Diocese of Vermont here today, but others may be listening to this, but many states are indirectly encouraging people to create what are known as inter vivos, or living trusts, where they place their assets in the trust while they are alive, and that enables them to move assets in and out of the trust. But what it typically gives the individual is privacy and direct control over everything that will be in that trust when that person passes away. And for the most part, that trust will serve as a distributory mechanism for the assets of that of what's in the trust. So those assets that are in the trust will not be a part of the probated estate. They will remain private, and that can be very appealing to many people who do not wish it to be revealed of what their total assets are and what is going through the probated will. Another aspect for you to be thinking about, reflecting on, and working with advisors to ensure is that many accounts that you may have, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, etc., are paid out based upon what's known as a pay on death circumstance, so that at the bottom of many applications nowadays, they may not be as popular in the state of Vermont, but they're quite popular all across the country, where you can designate an individual who would receive that actual account directly. All that person would need to do is typically to go to the bank, to the brokerage house, to whatever, and simply demonstrate through a proof of death and identification that they are the persons who would receive the assets directly. Now, if no designation like that is made, those assets would go into your general estate and need to be probated. However, more and more people are using this as a tool to direct those assets to individuals and to charities at their death. And it can be a very useful tool because they do not then end up in your probated estate. Tax-deferred accounts. I'll say more about a couple of these in our next webinar, but just in a nutshell, the vast majority of people in the future, not as much now, but even more so in the future, will have the vast majority of the assets that they are living off of retirement, through their retirement, in these tax-deferred accounts, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs. And they're great tools because while you're working, you're able to put assets away pre-tax. And then once you start drawing down after a certain time, sometimes required, we'll talk about that in the next webinar, you can take income out of these accounts. And of course, that is when you would pay the ordinary income tax on those assets. So this is something which many people will be paying more and more attention to. As I say, more and more people will have the vast majority of their assets in these. People my age, I'm 52, and younger, truly will have almost all of their assets in here because none of us have that magical thing called a pension. This joke works better in person, but I'm sure you've heard of a pension or a pension, as we say in English. Many of us just don't have those anymore. They don't really exist. And so all of the assets are in the tax-deferred accounts. And so decisions need to be made for what person, what institution would receive those assets after you pass away. Typically, you're leaving them to your spouse, and spouses have many more capabilities of working with those tax-deferred assets when they receive them. And of course, those are allocated typically, unless you don't specify, outside of your estate and given to a particular person. what you should do in your situation, speak to your professional advisors on. But there has been changes, and we'll get into that more in the next webinar. But if you're leaving it to a non-spouse, to a child, or to someone else, due to recent changes in the Secure Act, that person needs to spend down those assets within 10 years, which is very different from the way it had been in the past. So good planning is very important. Life insurance is also an asset. This is the last refuge of tax-free giving, where you could actually provide someone to be the beneficiary of life insurance. They don't pay taxes on what they receive. And so this can also be a part of your plan that you can go through with your financial advisor for what's appropriate and to whom you should give it. Real estate and titles. Make sure that you've worked with your appropriate legal guidance to ensure that all of your real estate is properly titled. Many people who are in same-sex relationships, who may have gotten married, may not have updated their titles in their real estate that they may hold jointly now that they are married. And there are different titles for married people versus non-married. And so I would just recommend that you look into that. Another thing, which is more of a gift, which we'll go into in the next webinar, would be a donor advised fund. More and more people are using donor advised funds, which allow you to make gifts right now, receive tax deductions for the gifts you make right now, and then make grants, I should say, out of that as you advise the provider of the donor advised fund in the future. That's really important because many people can use this as an opportunity to store up their giving while they're working. Perhaps when they need those tax deductions more while they're working, they can store up those gifts in a donor advised fund, which then when they retire and toward the end of life, they can give out grants from that and remain generous throughout retirement. Okay. So we're coming to the end of our time, but just another quick couple of screenshots. As you can see, it's a very extensive book. This is just two of them, making sure that you gather your information together before you go to that legal or financial advisor to go through your estate and make plans. Make sure that you are thinking through, again, reflect, remember, and then record all of the different assets that you may have now and that honestly you may anticipate receiving in the future from elderly relatives who may have done their own planning and let you know that you are going to receive assets from their estate. In summary, and would love to take some questions, take the time now to ensure that your wishes are fulfilled, reflect on these, make sure that your family and friends know what your wishes are. Keep good records. One of them is obviously the planning for the end-of-life guide and all of the legal documents for your will, your trust, and other things. But make sure that the people you're having advocate for you, both as health proxy, for your funeral, and in various opportunities as executor and other roles for advocating for you, that you make sure that people have copies of the documents so that they can refer to them and have greater clarity. As I mentioned before, this is so, so crucial when it comes for your own health care and what we've been dealing with recently with COVID-19 and these sudden illnesses that no one could have anticipated. Make sure that you have filled this out, shared it with your health proxy after setting up the appropriate form for Vermont or whatever state you might be in. Okay, I'd love to answer some questions. I know we had a bit of a hard start here, and I'm sorry for that. Again, Murphy's Law and technology.
Jim, Chris Chapman had a wonderful comment. You mentioned earlier about making a video for your loved ones. And Chris writes, this is an opportunity to tell each family member how much you love them and remind them of favorite times together. It may well be something that will be played again and again for years and even be handed down to next generations. Lovely thought.
It's really important. Actually, I do a lot of work with dioceses and parishes all throughout the country, encouraging how they can build up planned giving programs. And it's much the same theme for parishes too. You might want to leave behind a memory at your parish for how much your parish meant to you, or other folks that you might remember in your estate plan. Absolutely, family, think of them first and record those kinds of opportunities to share how much you loved them. But we're in a new era now, and with all of us at home so much, nothing stops you from making many different recordings and labeling them as appropriate and sharing them with the individuals who will be your advocates, as well as those who need to hear them and need to hear after maybe you have passed away or incapable of communicating how much you cared for them and what you want for them in their life. It's a magical thing.
One other question that occurs to me, Jim, you referred several times to state-specific forms. Typically,
Yeah.
where does one find what's typical to my state or specific to my state or my locale in terms of a medical directive or other kinds of documentation that is specific?
So the best way is to go on the main website for your state. And since different states will put them in different places, just do a search for medical directive, a search for health proxy. And most state sites will automatically bring up exactly what you need. And I think for sure we can make one up for the diocese. We can, I'm sorry, not make one up, but can put together the website that people could do for the state of Vermont, just for ease of use. Any other questions?
There are no other questions in the chat at this point, Jim.
All right, well, I'll just wrap up. So the Episcopal Church Foundation, as many of you know, we have tremendous resources that are available to you, including a number of webinars just like this on a variety of topics. All of my team at the Episcopal Church Foundation, overseeing our work in endowment management, plan giving, and donor solutions, is there to help you and to ensure that you can make sure that your wishes are fulfilled. And I'll just close there by thanking the wonderful Diocese of Vermont. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Chris, and everybody else who's been involved in this. And I can't tell you how anxious I am to reboot my system and try and clear the demons that have crept in this morning.
Isn't it always that way these days?
And Bishop, your blessing would help, so please.
Yes, well, I'm saying blessings on my own computer as well these days. Thank you so much, Jim. And I hope that many of you will join us for the next webinar. And I'm sure that Kathleen has plans to put all of this information and resources also on the website, so they will be available to you and to others. And I would encourage you to commend them to your friends once you've completed this webinar.
And Amy, are you putting up the link to the next webinar in chat? I know that we had a smaller sign up for the second webinar, but certainly everybody who's here is more than welcome to join us.
Great. So there's the link.
Yeah,
again.
I'm afraid to. I haven't been clicking on chat because I'm afraid something else is going to go wrong. So I presume it's up there. So
All
thank
right.
you all. Have a wonderful day. I am bidding farewell. Thank you, Bishop, and thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone in the wonderful Diocese of Vermont.
Thank you. See you in the next one.